GoPro has launched the HERO13 Black, but in an increasingly competitive market, has it done enough? It's fair to say that GoPro hasn't had the best of years. It had to lay off some staff earlier on in the year, but it is engaged in a growth strategy. Part of that is buying the motorcycle helmet company Foresight Helmets last year, and that should lead to newer, innovative products next year in that market space. But what about the action camera market? What about the HERO13 Black? This year GoPro has released two cameras, the HERO13 Black and the Hero. Now the Hero is a more entry-level camera aimed at people who just want to point and shoot the camera and not have to worry too much about settings. The HERO13 Black appears much more aimed at creators and people who want to do things with their action cameras that are beyond the standard action camera fare. And part of that is a new HB lens range, which includes a macro lens, an ultra-wide lens mod, which is very similar to last year's Max Lens Mod 2.0, a set of ND filters, and also an anamorphic lens, which is coming next year. The thing that separates GoPro's own lenses from third-party versions of these products is that they are smart lenses. You attach them to the camera and the camera automatically recognizes which one has been attached. And in the case of the ND filters, this makes using them really convenient and easy. Usually on an action camera, if you're using ND filters, it's a bit of a bind, it's a bit of a pain. You have to manually set everything up and you have to guess what light is right for that particular ND filter. With GoPro's own ND range, the camera will tell you whether it needs more or less ND, and you can set the camera so that it prioritizes motion blur, or to get a balance between motion blur as well as keeping good hyper-smooth stabilization. Now there's a brand new battery system for the camera. This has been increased from 1750 milliampere hours from last year to 1900 this year. This isn't going to give you huge gains in battery life, but it will improve things as far as thermal shutdowns go, and also in situations where the camera is being used where there is no wind flow. Now it has a slightly different shape to last year's, which accounts for the additional capacity, but this means that it is not compatible with previous GoPros. My feeling is that this is all part of a roadmap that leads towards a HERO14 next year, which will hopefully have a new GP3 processor and a much finer manufacturing process, which should hopefully give drastic increases to battery runtimes. There are some new burst slow motion modes on the camera, and these allow you to get short bursts, as the name would suggest, of ultra slow motion footage. Now you're going to take a resolution hit when you use these modes. For example, you can record 15 seconds of 400 frames per second footage at 720p. Now, although this does come at the cost of a resolution loss, it's nothing that you can't sort out in a piece of software like Topaz to help upconvert that to 4K and smooth things out a little bit. It's good to see it's making much more use of the sensor that is inside the camera. There's an HLG HDR mode, that's true HLG, so you can play it directly on your high definition television set. You can also use the HDR mode from last year as well. GP log is also still there, and you can use this in more modes than you could on the HERO12. For example, GP log is now available when you're using the lens mod as well, and that wasn't the case last year. Now, as far as using the lens mods in practice, The macro lens mod is an interesting one. It's not a true macro lens in the sense that you are not going to be getting 1:1 ratio macro shots of insects, for example, but it does mean that you can focus closer to the camera. When the lens mod is attached, it gives you focus peaking assist on the display, so you can make sure that you get those close objects in focus. And while it gives you the same angle of view as the standard lens on the camera, it does allow you to get shots that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to get. For example, you could get detailed shots of the derailleur on a mountain bike. And also, if you're doing vlogging shots, you can focus a camera closer to you. And what that does is it puts the background ever so slightly out of focus. By doing this, it means that you can get shots that don't look like your usual action camera fare. It separates it from the pack. It's a nice little touch. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but actually I've been finding it quite interesting to experiment with it and see what's possible. The only caveat is that it is manual focus. If you're doing a vlogging shot, it can be difficult to see the focus peaking on the front display, particularly if you're in GP log mode. But if you get it set up right, it does create a nice effect. Now, the ultra wide lens mod is my favorite of the bunch. I do a lot of stuff that involves POV shots, and I really do like the fact that the ultra wide lens mod now has a 1:1 ratio mode. This gives even more height than 8:7, and in post it means that I can use a lens distortion correction filter within Resolve, expand it out to a 16:9 ratio, and I still get more height than I would do with the ultra hyper view mode, but I also get rid of all that lens distortion, all that fisheye curvature, and it makes for an absolutely fantastic POV shot in my kayak. It's something that I can't do on any other action camera. Now, I've always said that the ultra wide mode on the DJI Osmo Action is the to die for wide angle for POV on action cameras, and it still is. It's still an absolutely fantastic mode on that camera, but there is no other action camera on the market that can get an angle of view as wide as the ultra wide lens mod on the GoPro. It's 177 degrees, so it's effectively 1/2 of a 360 camera. I would say though, if you are doing POV with it, it's very much suited to looking straight ahead. If you angle it up or down, you can get some very weird looking effects. So you need to be careful about the angle that you mount it, much like last year's Max Lens Mod 2.0. You can of course use the built-in POV modes like the Ultra Hyper View and the Ultra Super View if you don't want to be doing any correction afterwards in post, but you will see lots of distortion in those modes, particularly in Ultra Hyper View. Although that said, they are absolutely brilliant for POV views. Now, the only thing I find with the ultra wide lens mod is that when it comes to water sports, it does tend to attract droplets. It has a hydrophobic coating on it, but it doesn't always work that well, particularly if you've taken the lens into other situations where it might have picked up minor scratches here or there, like mine did, falling off a bike. Now I've started using X-Clear on it, and that seems to work a lot better than the built-in hydrophobic coating, although I still get lens drops. The only thing is that when you do get lens drops on this particular lens mod, unlike the original or the standard GoPro lens, when it gets lens drops on it, it doesn't smudge out a whole area. The lens drops tend to stay quite small, so you can still see the general view. So luckily, even if you do get lens droplets on it, it's not going to completely ruin your shot. It's annoying, but it's not going to completely ruin it. I just wish there was a way of making a hydrophobic coating that would just get rid of all these lens droplets. They can be frustrating in a water sports situation. It's something to be aware of if you're using the lens mod in that particular situation. And it will also apply if you're using it in mountain biking in the rain as well. I apologise for the view of my dog's bottom. Another positive thing I can say about the ultra wide lens mod is it does seem pretty robust. It did take a pretty big knock off my mountain bike, a knock that cracked the rear screen on the camera, and also utterly decimated the Osmo Action 5 Pro, which I was testing alongside it as well. That completely blew out the screen on that one. But the ultra wide lens mod survived with fairly minor damage. There are some tiny scratches if you look closely, but they don't affect the image quality at all, apart from in water sports where droplets do tend to congregate around where those scratches occurred. Now, something else that I've been waiting for on the GoPro, and I'm so glad they've finally done it, is the magnetic clip mount system. We've been waiting for this for a few years now. GoPro isn't the first company to do it, but what they have done they've done it really well indeed. It's a nice solid mount. It's made out of, I guess, aluminium, but the way in which they've designed it is that although it has some side buttons which could get knocked in a violent situation, if one of them is knocked, it's pretty much impossible to pull the camera off it unless the second clip is pressed. It's a really solid system that you can trust. Now, GoPro says not to use it in situations where you have high vibration, but for most people, I think it will be the go-to mount, particularly if you have multiple situations in which you want to mount your camera, you want to quickly swap over from different positions. It's going to make things so much more convenient, so much quicker. It's something I've been waiting for a while now, and I'm so glad they've done it. Even though they're not the first, good on you, GoPro, for finally doing it. Now, battery life on the camera is fairly similar to what you would get from the Hero 12, apart from in specialist scenarios, such as when the camera is static with no airflow. That is where the new battery system gives most of its advantages. The one thing holding back the Hero 13 is the GP2 processor. Other cameras like the Osmo Action 5 Pro uses a 4nm process chip. You've got the Ace Pro from Insta360, which is a 5nm chip, and these are much more power frugal. They have much longer run times as a result, and they also run cooler as a result. Now, it's a given that GoPro will be working on a GP3 chip, and it's likely that that chip will be using a much finer fabrication process. If that is the case, then this year, I think, is going to be the last year that we see the GP2 processor. And then we'll see the real gains in battery life come next year with a GP3. But when it comes to thermal shutdowns on the GoPro, I don't tend to use the camera in situations where that is likely. Most of the time I'm using it in an outdoors environment. It's moving about, it's got airflow, it's getting wet. In real world use, I've never had a thermal shutdown. I know there are situations where people do use them. For example, you might have it mounted inside the cockpit of a racing car in a hot country, and I can see how that would create problems over extended periods of time. But for me personally, I've not encountered it at all. But this kind of issue is something that you need to consider when you're buying one of these cameras. You need to be thinking about how you are going to be using your camera. And if this is a big thing for you, then maybe one of the other cameras is going to be better suited to your usage. The big annoyance for me with the new GoPro is that there's still no fast charging capability. Rival cameras such as the Osmo Action 5 can be charged to 80% of the capacity within 15 minutes or so. You still have to wait a couple of hours for a GoPro to charge up, even though the Hero 13 is slightly faster than the Hero 12. I'm not sure why GoPro hasn't done it, but it really absolutely has to be something that comes on the Hero 14 next year. Image quality wise, you're not going to notice much difference on the Hero 13 from last year's model. I do find the normal color profile to be a little bit harsh, particularly in contrasty situations. It does give a very contrasty, saturated look right out of the box, and is great for people who just want to shoot and forget and just get a great look out of the camera. But I would say it's not very forgiving for skin tones. I found it tend to make me look like some haggard bad guy from a Sergio Leone spaghetti western who might have spent the last week out in the desert somewhere. You know, I know I'm no spring chicken, but I didn't think my skin was quite that bad. So it's something to be mindful of. In those sorts of scenarios where you're using it for vlogging, I would use GP log mode or the flat color profile. But for scenarios where you're using it on a mountain bike for POV or skiing, then the natural profile would give you a good look straight out of the camera. A nice new addition finally is the ability to control the amount of noise reduction in the image. And this is particularly useful when it comes to GP log and you're doing grading and you want to do any noise control in post. It's great to finally see it. It's something that I've been suggesting for a while, and I'm glad to see that GoPro has finally implemented it in the standard firmware. Previously, you could do it in the labs firmware, and not everyone wants to do that. So it's really good to see it finally in the inbuilt firmware of the camera. Now, audio-wise, you can, of course, connect to a Bluetooth microphone, and that includes a DJI Mic 2. But the drawback is that the DJI Mic 2 will only transmit 16 kilohertz audio to standard Bluetooth devices. This is a shame. I would like to see GoPro perhaps make its own microphone. An all-weather microphone that's completely waterproof would be absolutely amazing to see them do. It would get over these kinds of issues, as well as giving a true adventure solution to sound. There's a setting on the HERO13 which allows you to select between a general focus or a voice focus. Personally, I haven't noticed a huge amount of difference between the two. Okay, so there's a bit of wind. Let's see how this picks up my voice. Very windy, so this is in the standard mode. Okay, so this is a test in windy conditions. I've got it on voice focus mode, so you can see how that sounds as well. Reliability wise, I found the HERO13 to be pretty reliable actually. In the quick capture mode, which is when you press record, the camera will turn on and start recording automatically. And then when you press record again, it will stop recording and power down. Now it gives you a 5-second delay with which you can press record again and carry on recording, or you can press the power button to just halt the process altogether. And so far, it hasn't missed a beat. I haven't lost a recording yet. It hasn't frozen on me yet. So far, the camera has been reliable for me. Okay, so the question is, in light of the competition, should you buy the GoPro? Should you still be considering it? And as I say in all of my reviews, it depends on how you're going to be using the camera. A lot of reviews focus on the idea of whether you should upgrade from last year's model, and I don't fully agree with this, because most people are not upgrading their camera year on year. It just doesn't happen. For a lot of people, these devices are expensive. If you're not using it in a professional capacity, it's an expensive device to keep having to buy every year. And so I'd imagine not many people really do that. The way to look at this is to look at the camera in isolation and how it compares with the competition. The GoPro HERO13 is still one of the best action cameras on the market. It still produces a great image. So what are the advantages of the GoPro over the competition? I think that comes down to whether you are an advanced user or not. You can use a HERO13 in an easy mode, which takes all the thought process out of setting it up. It's great for that. But where the HERO13 comes into its own is if you are an advanced user who really wants to push the action camera to its limits in terms of what you can do with the image. In terms of versatility, the GoPro is the one to get. The 1x1 mode with the ultra-wide lens mod and the 8x7 mode with the standard lens. These give you flexibility for reframing, for social media, for post-correction that you don't get on other action cameras. You also have the Labs firmware, which again, it's a niche thing. Not everyone is going to be using a Labs firmware, but the fact is it's available, and it allows you to get the camera to do things that you simply cannot get any other action camera on the market to do. And a lot of these functions that are found within the Labs give you a view on what GoPro might have in mind for future cameras, because it is an experimental firmware to see how these features work and to see which ones are most in demand and what might get put on a future model. But again, it's something that you don't find on any other action camera. The HB lens mods, such as the forthcoming anamorphic lens and the macro lens, they let you get shots that look different from your standard action camera fare. So I would say that the HERO13 is very much focused on people who want to get a bit more creative with their action cameras and want to create a bit more than just POV shots all the time. And all these factors make the GoPro one of the most versatile action cameras on the market at the moment. No, it doesn't have the battery life of the Osmo Action 5 or the Insta360 cameras. Yes, it can overheat in some situations. For me, I love the ultra-wide lens mod. It's one of the best POVs on the market currently, and it gives an angle of view that you just can't get anywhere else. So, has GoPro done enough this year? I think these are pretty solid additions. I know some people will be disappointed at the fact that there is no new processor in the camera or no new sensor. There is no new sensor that the GoPro could use, by the way. That is also a factor that comes into the design of these things. It's not just a case of picking up any old sensor off a shelf. It does have to suit the purposes that the company needs to use it for. But in terms of whether it is still a contender on the market, yes, absolutely it is. It is still one of the best. So whether or not the HERO13 is better for you than the Osmo Action 5 or the Insta360 Ace Pro will come down entirely to how you use the camera. And it's something that I cannot emphasize enough.